go now until Ireland hosts Australia at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday. On today's special episode of the Left Wing podcast, we are going to get a unique insight into life with Joe Schmidt Wallabies. I'm Will Slattery, and I'm delighted to be joined by Eoin Toolan, Head of Analysis and Skills Coach with Australia. Eoin, how are you?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on the pod.
No, my pleasure. It must be a homecoming not only for Joe Schmidt, but for yourself as well. What's this week been like being back? Has that played any factor in the preparation, just the Joe kind of return to Ireland and facing off against Andy Farrell?
Not a whole heap, to be honest. It's a pretty short turnaround, but obviously only 6 days between games, and we flew straight out of Edinburgh post game on Sunday night. So it's been a really kind of condensed preparation, and all the focus has been on the game. There's obviously the sideshow around Joe obviously coming back, having had such success over here with Ireland. But yeah, the attention is definitely towards the pitch at this moment in time.
And, can you give us a bit of an insight into what the camp has been like over the last couple of weeks? Obviously, a lot of people here maybe didn't see it that much rugby championship, but maybe saw the results and were pretty concerned about where Australian rugby was going. But obviously, the great win in Twickenham backed it up with a very impressive win in Wales. Obviously, a difficult day in Scotland last Sunday, but overall, it seems to be treading in the right direction. Like, what's the mood been like? What's the preparation been like? How would you kind of assess where the team is at coming into this weekend?
Yeah, I think in a really good place. Obviously, very performance focused group, really. Certain areas of the game that we would place a strong emphasis on, and that we've seen evolution in throughout the rugby championships, and probably frustratingly just weren't able to consistently deliver those for 80 minutes. But there was some really good green shoots in there. Obviously, the win over in Argentina, which is a really difficult place to play. And even in that second game, La Plata, I think we were 20 points to 3 up after about 25 minutes before falling into a little bit of a hole in that last quarter. So, and that's got, when you have 18 debutants so far this season, there is going to be kind of ebbs and flows in performance. So, but we've been really pleased what we saw throughout July into Rugby Championship, and now I guess the fruits of the players' labor was kind of showed in those opening 2 games in Twickenham and Wales, where they were probably able to sustain for longer periods of play the kind of the game model we're trying to implement, and they got probably the results that their efforts deserved.
Well, yeah, you had to go deep into your reserve and Twickenham anyway for that Max Jorgensen try. I think everyone, all the neutrals, everyone bar England supporters probably, I think, very much enjoyed that one. Head of analysis, interesting role, I'm sure. A lot of people might see in the coach's box with Ireland, Andy Farrell, Vinnie Hammond alongside him, kind of working very closely together. How would you describe to people listening what your role is in the camp and how it dovetails with what Joe Schmidt wants to do with the coaches and also with the players?
Yeah, definitely a little bit of a hybrid role. We've got 2 other really good performance analysts, and Matt Watkins, who was at Bath for a period of time before coming over to work for the Brumbies, and Jared Rutley, who's worked with the Melbourne Rebels and the Australian A teams as well. So a really experienced team. And obviously, yeah, I guess in the modern age, performance analysis plays such a critical kind of role in team preparation, obviously in terms of preview of opposition, review of your own performance. So a lot of emphasis goes into it. The analysts do a great job in supporting the coaches in terms of their requirements. Really experienced coaching staff with obviously Mike Cron from a scrum perspective, Larry Fisher defense, and Jeff Parling, who's had a great career and has done exceptionally well so early into his coaching career that they're pretty demanding in terms of what they need from the analysts. And then Joe is pretty much the 4th analyst, isn't he? He picks everything up. His eye for detail has not diminished over the years. And yeah, he's phenomenal in terms of picking out obviously opportunities with opposition, ensuring that we're intentional in terms of what we do, in terms of how we're trying to play the game. And yeah, it's an enjoyable side of the game that we spend a fair bit of time at.
And like Joe Schmidt's Monday review sessions are infamous. Are you the man who's putting those together then? Is he coming to you and saying this, and this, I want to rinse this guy, and then you're kind of like picking out the clips?
Not so much anymore. He's pretty self-sufficient, to be honest. He's good across his tech and his detail and what he wants to deliver. But yeah, I think that probably side of things has evolved in terms of how much information players can retain, being really intentional around what information you deliver. And yeah, Joe is exceptionally good at that, as well as the other coaches. And yeah, it's getting down to the critical few and having a pretty narrow focus. I think probably when I look back to July when we all came together, it was I think there was probably only four staff from the previous regime. I think nutrition, logistics, social media that were retained. So it was a completely brand new staff that came together. So that takes a little bit of time to gel. And obviously, as I said, 18 debutants as well. You're trying to build some cohesion both on and off the field, and having that narrow focus and focus on what's really important was something that we've tried to layer on as the season's developed.
Obviously everyone saw from afar Eddie Jones coming in. It was a complete catastrophe of a year for Australian rugby. It looked like it would be a real struggle to get them back up, that's what it's nice to see the last couple of weeks. But what did you find as coaches going in? Like, did you find that it was the players were kind of very demoralized after what was a very difficult period?
Yeah, obviously when we first came in, obviously it was a pretty testing time for them off the back of the World Cup. I would say confidence was low, but it was probably just speaking to the players and kind of seeing how they wanted to be perceived, and giving them an input in terms of how they wanted to play the game, because there's so much quality players in Australia. It's probably just enabling and creating an environment and a framework that they're able to thrive in. And I think you're seeing now that with not a huge amount of preparation time, that talent is starting to show through, and we're getting some more sustained periods of performance in game.
And the skills element of your role, like some of the skills on show from these guys in November has been spectacular. Obviously, Joseph Suaalii, people are very excited to see. Like, what's it like working with guys like that, top end athletes with like, serious, kind of X factor?
Yeah, I'd like to take some credit for Suli's skills, but that's all himself. To be honest with you, he's an amazing athlete, and yeah, as I said, we're just trying to create an environment and a framework that they can express themselves and use the skill sets that they do have, and trying to, I guess, wherever you can, try and contribute to that, and try and continue to build on their rugby IP and their rugby understanding, and when and where and how they can use their skill sets to influence games.
Obviously the Lions tour is the big kind of carrot in the medium term. Is that something that's been spoken about a lot in terms of like as a goal, preparing towards? It's obviously looming large, I'm sure, in the public's mind over in Australia. But how are you guys approaching that? Is it parked for now, or is it something that you're kind of mentioning sporadically to kind of focus the minds a bit as well?
Very much parked, to be honest. We're game to game focus. Obviously, rugby championship, you're playing the top teams in the world in South Africa, New Zealand, Argentina, and then coming straight off the bat into England and Twickenham. You have to be short term focused, don't you? And yes, I think in the back you're trying to develop a squad, build some combinations, and that's been an ongoing process throughout the season. And I think you're starting to see a little bit of cohesion, and guys getting confident playing together in those partnerships. Which, when you look at Ireland, it's one of their huge upticks, isn't it? The cohesive nature of their players and their coaching staff. That you can see they're an extremely well-oiled machine. So we're just trying to build those combinations to build confidence, to hopefully get really good performances, results to come off the back of that, and then we'll worry about the Lions next year.
Well, so how much time are you spend looking at Ireland on the laptop?
Yeah, fair bit. Yeah, one of my roles would be to run the opposition plays during the week. So yeah, particularly Ireland, they got such weapons off their structured attack. I think 70% of their tries this year have come off line out. So they've got a huge amount of variation and sophistication to their play. So a lot of time has been spent at the laptops trying to analyze those and trying to figure out what ones they might try and implement this weekend. But yeah, it's impressive, isn't it? The impact that their structured attack has in the game and how they're able to unpick defenses. It's enjoyable to watch, but it won't be so enjoyable this weekend.
Yeah, is it funny for you, like someone who, obviously you're working in Australia, but you'll be very plugged into Irish rugby generally, and I'm sure you watch a lot of it as well, to kind of specifically now get the game plan or help game plan to go up against it? It must be a funny way of kind of flipping what you might usually be doing when you're just watching them play and just maybe not enjoying it. You probably have your analyst hat on, but just a different kind of focus on it this week.
Yeah, it's kind of strange now. I've been out of Ireland almost 11 years, so it's been a long time since I think the last game was Ireland, New Zealand in the Aviva in 2013. So it'll be strange going back there. But yeah, you've obviously watched from afar and been impressed the trajectory of that team. Obviously, Joe into Andy Farrell have been one of the top teams in the world for a sustained period of time. So, and I think that recognition is something that is very much in the Southern Hemisphere as well. They're much lauded in New Zealand and Ireland for how they, New Zealand and Australia for how they play the game. So yeah, it's been enjoyable to take a closer look at that and see how they do things and trying to see trends in their game and try and obviously from an attacking perspective, you're looking at opportunities. But again, I think Simon Easterby's done a brilliant job from a defensive side of things. I think they've only conceded 4 tries in the 3 games this November. So the defensive side of the game probably doesn't get the plaudits that it probably deserves because they're an incredibly difficult team to break down also.
Yeah, and I mentioned Joseph Suaalii earlier. Like a lot of people, loved watching him play in Twickenham in particular. That like what a first kind of introduction to international rugby. Like it's funny, given he hadn't played a union game, I think since he was in school. Like, what was it like having him in camp? Did Joe have to like really get kind of granular about like rugby union again with him, or how was that kind of process of embedding him back into a different sport? I know it's obviously similar, but differences as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Key
And
differences.
to be fair, I think Joseph has kind of demonstrated very early on what a pro he is, and his preparation is exceptional, both physically and mentally in terms of how he prepares for games. And he's been a sponge. He absolutely loves detail, craves it. He was a precocious underage player in Australian rugby union. He would be the equivalent of playing uh, senior cup rugby when he was 15 in school. So he had 4 years of senior cup rugby essentially in the Australian system. So it's obviously a massive step up from schools rugby into international rugby, but he's definitely learning all the time. You want to try and keep a pretty narrow focus and keep things relatively simple for him, but it's a pretty complex position, 13, both from an attacking perspective and defensive side of things. So he's done really well, and he'll continue to grow. He's definitely got a long way to go, and he knows that himself. But yeah, some of the physical attributes he has is incredibly exciting.
Yeah, well, everyone's hoping he features this weekend. I know it looked like he got a serious knock last weekend, but thankfully it appears it wasn't as bad as it looked initially. Him coming over from rugby league obviously was interesting. Rugby league is so big in Australia. I'm sure a lot of people listening understand the place NRL has there. Like, what's the rugby union's place in the pecking order? You do hear a lot that it's kind of behind rugby league and maybe Aussie rules and even cricket. Is it like kind of a tough to break through into the sporting public there because Australian love their sport? There's so many different things they can choose from. How does rugby union fit in, and where's the kind of battle there? Do you think?
Yeah, it is a competitive landscape, and the pull for talent is is really impressive in terms of the resources about rugby league, AFL, and rugby union. To be fair, are trying to put into it. There's synergies to Ireland. To be honest, like a lot of the kids growing up will play rugby union and rugby league, very much like rugby and Gaelic on this side of the world. So it's probably just the resources. Obviously, NRL is pretty much a domestic game. Yes, it is played in the UK, but I think their current TV deal is worth about $2 billion. So the amount of resources that they can put into their not just the top end of the game, but because there's not really those external market pressures for the NRL that you experience in rugby union being an international game, that they tend to hold on to their talent and they can invest in the pathway system, which have done a really good job of. But there's definitely a huge talent pool of rugby union players as well. It's just and a guy like Peter Horn, the director of high performance, coming into the Australian system now has been critical in terms of that kind of shared vision, building a sustainable system, trying to create that alignment that we identify these players and we have a kind of sustainable model that you can hold on to those players when they come out of the school system into the professional game, because it is a like take Sydney as an example. There are 10 NRL teams in Sydney alone. FL, there's 9 teams in Melbourne alone. Their current TV deals were $4.7 billion. So it's a mega game that you'd equate to probably EPL over here, and a huge amount of resources. But there's a lot of good people in rugby union in Australia doing great things. And I said now that Peter's putting that strategy in place and a kind of coordinated approach to the bottom end of the game right the way through to high performance. I think you'll see the fruits of that labor in the years to come.
God, 10 rugby league teams in Sydney. That's mad.
Yeah, incredible. And yeah, you've got Australian teams winning every week, right? Whereas in Super Rugby, you're up against historically South African, New Zealand, Fiji teams. So it's a different type of landscape, and obviously the the sheer scale of Australia, the state model of Super Rugby makes it difficult for supporters to go to away games. You're jumping on a plane, whereas obviously NRL, you're getting in a car, jumping across the city to go watch your team play away from home. So there is certain advantages that the NRL have, but I think that the global nature of the game and seeing guys like Joseph come across to Rugby Australia is obviously really promising. He's obviously just entering the peak of his career at 21, and he understands what's on the horizon from Lions into Home World Cup. So I think there's a recognition there that there's a lot that the game can offer players in Australia as well.
One thing that's pretty crazy to me is that, like, this is the last game of the November window. The Irish guys will go back into Champions Cup, Six Nations. There'll be line selection, chat, and all that. But for Australian players and for you guys as coaches, like the next time you convene, the Lions tour will be upon you. You'll probably get a warm up game or two, but then it's hitting the ground running and playing a 3-test series with all the eyes of the rugby world upon you. Like, what challenges does that pose, do you think? I know it's kind of looking into the future, but it's just something that occurred to me during the week, and I thought it's a tough way to have to go into a line store, I'd imagine.
It is tough, yeah, and a first time for a lot of us having to do it. So it'll be a new learning experience as well. But I think that's why I've been so short term focused week to week in terms of this November block is just getting good results, good performances, building confidence. And then if those things come then off the back of that, when we get into camp next year, that a lot of the fundamentals will already have been embedded. You're hoping, obviously, Australia's consolidated down to 4 teams now, so you would hope that that makes it a more competitive Super Rugby season. Our Australian teams go deep into the playoffs, and potentially we might get those players um, up until weeks before that first test. So you want your club players obviously going well for the clubs. That winning builds confidence, doesn't it? And then we'll worry about that prep time once they get into camp.
Yeah, like during the Super Rugby season, does the coaching staff, is there any camps? Do you guys have any access to the players, or could it literally just be like you don't see them after this weekend until a couple of weeks before the tour?
Yeah, we're definitely cognizant of giving the super. We obviously have the guys for 6 months. They've been in camp with us really from July up until the end of November. So we're cognizant once they go back to their super clubs that we don't kind of impinge on their preparation time with super. So there won't be anything during super. We'll leave them play with their clubs. But Joe's obviously building great relationships. There's some quality coaches in the Australian system. Les Kiss, obviously, who you guys would know well. Dan McKellar's come back to the Taz. Steve Larkham down in Brumbies, and Simon Cron over in Perth. So a lot of guys with international experience that Joe would have known from the past or is building relationships. So I think that's critical as well, that you're touching base with those guys pretty regularly. And I guess there's a shared responsibility isn't it, with those players, that we're trying to develop them as a player first, both for their clubs and country.
It is funny how different the schedules are in the hemispheres, isn't it? Like you're just mentioning it there. Like you guys have basically just been uninterruptedly playing international rugby, like post club season. And here it's obviously in and out and in and out. It's very, very different. And it's hard. I don't know. The Southern Hemisphere teams have traditionally done better, obviously, at World Cups, but that might be just because they're better teams. But it's interesting which one is a better way of, seasoning guys for international competitions.
Yeah, it is enjoyable. Obviously, there has been a push from World Rugby to try to come up with a global season. There's just so many stakeholders involved, isn't it? It makes it difficult. But yeah, I've kind of obviously done both Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, and having time to work with guys for a sustained period of time is enjoyable. The travel side of it isn't as enjoyable. You're obviously heading over to Argentina, New Zealand. So the travel can be challenging, and the nature of Australia is you're never in the same city more than a week, because your home games could be in Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Melbourne. So you're bouncing around a pretty big country. So the travel is a challenging side of it, but having access to the players has been enjoyable. And obviously with quality coaches like that we've got in our system, they're definitely developing the players, and the players themselves have been brilliant to work with. Really enthusiastic to better themselves, and it's been an enjoyable environment to be a part of.
Yeah, one last question for you, because I know you're a busy man. What will your role be on match day? Like, will you be kind of on the laptop, getting stuff ready for half time? Will Joe say to you, 10 minutes before the break, "Oh, could you pick up this, this, and this?" Or how does that go for you on a match day?
Yeah, I run the T, so I have a close relationship with the kickers, obviously, and pass messages that's coming from the coach's box onto the field, and then, as I said, Matt and Jared are in the box, kind of facilitating that side of things, whatever the guys might want. Mike Cron's on the touchline, so he's got access to the scrum vision, and then Jeff and Laurie and Joe in the box have access to the footage, and And yeah, kind of getting down to the critical information, whether it's from a stats perspective or a vision perspective of what the key messages is for halftime and how best to pass it on to the playing group.
I've never really thought about that role, passing on the messages with the team, stuff like that. Like, so you're getting like it straight from Joe. It could be very important information. You have to kind of distill it down or present it in an easy, bite-sized way for guys as they're taking a bit of water. It's actually quite an interesting role that I haven't given much thought to until now.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you're obviously trying to just deliver the critical information, not overloading them too much, but to trying to impact on something, whether it's strategic or technical, whatever it might be. But yeah, it's a challenging role, but one that I enjoy.
Well, Owen, thanks so much for joining us. It was great to get a unique insight, as I said, into life with Joe Schmidt's Wallabies. Best of luck in the weekend.
Cheers, Will. Thanks for having me on.